Hello and welcome to The Big Picture. In a spectacular display of its military power, China commemorated the 70th anniversary of the end of the Second World War yesterday. While the display itself brought about gasps across the world, the announcement by the Chinese President Xi Jinping on the occasion that China would reduce its military strength by 3 lakh troops has surprised most. The unexpected announcement of the reduction has put focus on the Chinese military power and its capabilities. It is said that after this reduction, which is expected to be undertaken by 2017, it will bring down the troop strength to 2 million. This is said to be the largest reduction undertaken since 1997, when 5 lakh troops were cut, followed by another 2 lakhs in early 2000. Why is China indulging in such massive troop reduction? What is the signal it is trying to send out? How would it affect its capabilities? And how India looks at this reduction of troops, and if there would be any similar pressure on India also. We will discuss all this today with Rajiv Sikri, former Secretary, Ministry of External Affairs, Commodore retired Uday Bhaskar, Director, Society for Policy Studies, P. Stobdan, Senior Fellows, Institute for Defence Studies and Analysis, Dr. Sreeram Chaulia, Professor and Dean, Jindal School of International Affairs, and from Beijing on the phone line is Atul Aneja, Associate Editor, The Hindu. Welcome to all of you. Mr. Sikri, how do you see this decision to reduce such massive numbers?
Well, I think the first thing I want to say is that it's not the most important outcome of this parade. It is the symbolism of the parade itself, intended to showcase China's might. There's a certain irony to the whole thing that it's against the Japanese aggression. But were it not for the Japanese aggression, the Chiang Kai regime would not have fallen, the communists would not have come to power. So the communists are claiming credit for victory in which they had no role to play, actually, as such. Otherwise, I see the parade more as a showcasing of the new, more self-confident China. It is Xi Jinping's first military parade. I'm told this is probably only the 4th parade that has ever been held.
They have never commemorated Second World War, end of Second World War so far. This is the first time they're doing it.
I mean, so what is the reason? So it is because it is Xi Jinping who wants to showcase at a particular time in Chinese history when it is going through troubles, when there's some uncertainty over the economy. So here they are saying, well, you know, we're a great nation, we should be... This is a shock and awe kind of approach.
And they seem to have succeeded to some extent.
Well, I don't think people will get taken in. What they do on the ground creates more of an impact than all these things. But everyone knows that China is engaged in a military modernization program. As far as the actual reduction of the troops is concerned, this was something which was on the cards. So it was an occasion on which to announce it. But I think that the significance is not so great because in the coming decades, the nature of warfare is changing and there will be more emphasis on cyber warfare, on space warfare, on non-conventional warfare. So, we should look at what they're doing in that field rather than just a bean counting of the numbers of troops that have been reduced.
Atul, how is it being looked at, you sitting in Beijing, how do you look at these developments?
First of all, Girish, we need to contextualize China's military modernization, where I agree with Mr. Rajiv Sikri that this is an ongoing process which started in the 80s and it has gained much greater momentum now precisely because of the changing context of the threat perception of China, which is the U.S. rebalance strategy or Asia pivot or pivot to Asia, which is the Obama doctrine, which is positioning about 60% of American forces in the Pacific. So this modernization comes in that context of the beefing up of American forces in the region. So, otherwise we come to a wrong conclusion as if China is the expansionist power. As I see it, and as people in Beijing see it, it is a response to the heavy accumulation of American forces in the Asia Pacific. Coming specifically to the troop reduction numbers, well, it's not a question. It's a question of China becoming a more technologically intensive modern armed force. So in nowhere, I don't see much significance in that, in the sense of reducing Chinese capability. In fact, on the contrary, by the infusion of greater technology, China is modernizing and increasing the full spectrum fighting capability of its armed forces. So these are the 2 points which I want to make at the outset.
Okay. Uday Bhaskar? Uday Bhaskar, how do you look at this? Do you think that as Atul was pointing out, more modernization of the forces and doing away with forces which have become,
Well, I would say, Girish, that how do I look at it? Perhaps as a security analyst, I would say with a lot of interest. Because this parade has many, I would say, levels of symbolism and many messages. I think both Rajiv and Atul have already identified some of the areas. And to extend this, I would say that for me, what was interesting was the spectacle of the parade. Meaning that many governments use such symbols, particularly military parades, to get a certain message across, both to the domestic audience and to the external interlocutor. So if you looked at the range of ordnance on display, very clearly I think China is projecting what you might call as the contour of its comprehensive military capability. Now attention was drawn to their missiles. Now to me, it seemed that there was a very clear message in putting all this range of 4 or 5 class of missiles on the parade, giving out their ranges and what they would mean to the tactical domain, as it were. The second is the emphasis on the fact that most of the platforms were of Chinese design and manufacture. So drawing attention to China's own indigenous capability. Apart from missiles, which is the ordnance part, very interestingly, they drew attention to their airborne early warning systems, meaning surveillance is another very important component. And finally, even as the parade was marching down Beijing and Tiananmen, you had Chinese ships in Alaska. So in a way, you are drawing attention to what I might call as China's composite military capability and to the domestic audience. You said, why didn't they do the parade earlier? The last time World War II was actually recalled at this scale was 50 years after 45 in 1995. But at that time, China was 6 years away from Tiananmen, the communist leadership. So they had their own reasons. So there was a very clear message to the domestic audience that China's profile is very credible. And go back to the old Mao dictum that power still flows out from the barrel of the gun. And we are invested in the military capability of the state.
What about the
in
reduction?
An impressive way.
What about the reduction?
I would say the reduction, I'll go along with what Ambassador Sikri said. It's been going on for a decade plus. Today, the received wisdom is no country can really sustain a standing army, which at one time, if you recall, China was 3 million plus. They're coming down. But the only point, Girish, in as much as the PLA is coming down, you must look at the numbers which are increasing as far as China's internal security is concerned, the equivalent of their paramilitary and their police. So like any leadership, I think they are maximizing both the symbolism of the parade and also pruning their forces so that they are sustainable in a modern environment where you do not need as much of quote-unquote boots on the ground as you do the technological attributes of military capability.
Okay. Mr. Stobdan, it's very interesting, the speech of Xi Jinping in the parade. He was talking of peace.
Yeah, that's quite surprising. But nonetheless, I think this is an important statement. He talked about reduction linking to the reducing tension with neighbors,
right,
or peace with neighbor, or something like that. Mind you that this is taking place against the backdrop of complete synergy on the land borders with Russia.
Exactly. And Putin himself being there.
The entire country is today concentrated in Europe, Ukraine, standoff with the West. So whether it is Russia or the other actors, other states in the Central Asian theater, there's a complete conversion of interests with China. You have all sorts of arrangement, security arrangement with these land border countries. When you look at with Pakistan, they have the same. Afghanistan, there's a new relationship. Myanmar, they have quite a good relationship, and also on the other borders with Mongolia, North Korea. So Atul has rightly said that concentration is on Asia Pacific. So therefore, I think there is a logic. But I would also look at this issue from a political angle of domestic tension between the military and the party. If you recall, even after Depsang incident with India, Xi Jinping was quite upset with the military command.
And he was here when it was happening.
Yes, there was massive crackdown on the corruption against PLA officers.
Right.
So I think this is to show that, army has to be brought down. Otherwise, it's like Pakistani army getting out of control of the civilian authority. I won't say civilian authority, but Xi Jinping remains the chairman of the CMC. So I think this is quite symbolic. It's quite interesting. This is the major takeaway I see from the parade.
Okay, Sreeram? Atul was talking about the messages being sent to America.
Well, the pivot has not actually been executed as well as the Americans would have wanted and as much as the Chinese were fearing. So I don't think that, the modernization is keeping pace with the pivot and is defensive. Rather, from the point of view of the smaller neighbors that China has in the region, this is an offensive build-up, and the more China invests in the Navy, for example, because the Navy is always small in terms of numbers, but has the expansionary ability and the Air Force. Because the land army, there's a limit. I mean, China hasn't fought a major land war since Vietnam 1979. Right. So if you look at it from the point of view of the smaller neighbors, this modernization, even the troop reduction, can be seen as threatening, and they need to prepare for potential enhancement of the naval capabilities of China. Because that's, in a way, it's like a trade-off. I mean, if they're reducing emphasis on the army, then it's going to go into the other wings. And then there is cyber. I mean, there, in fact, the American angle comes in more. Because recently, the Americans claimed that the Office of Personnel Management had been hacked and millions of accounts were stolen, data, and the Chinese are most likely behind it. And of course, the Americans also do the same, vice versa to the Chinese, as we know from the Snowden revelations. So I think if they do more of this so-called informationization of the military, and they are capable, they're talking about tanks that even if you take out aerial satellites, they'll still be guided by satellites on the ground. And of course, their fighter jets and missiles, carrier busters and satellite killers. So we're talking about, a military which is spending around $250 to $300 billion a year, and is second only to the United States, and wants to establish hegemony in the Asia Pacific. So from that point of view, I would differ from Atul because it is, at the end of the day, an asymmetrical situation. In fact, if you look at the force levels, although the Americans have more assets worldwide, the Chinese are prepared to basically deter them and to disrupt them in what they call like an asymmetric, strategy, where they'll be able to achieve their strategic goals in the Asia Pacific anyway. So, be it reunification of Taiwan, be it deterring Vietnamese or the Filipinos, and of course, there's always a question of what they'll do in the Indian Ocean as they expand. So I would look at it, this rearrangement, internal rearrangement that they're doing, eventually will have, major threat perceptions and raise threat perceptions in the region. So Xi Jinping can go out and make a virtue out of necessity and say, we're cutting down troops and it's a symbol that we are in favor of peace. But the point is, messaging, talk is cheap. In international affairs, deeds and actions speak louder.
Atul, would you like to react to that?
Oh, yes. You see, I don't agree with your other guest, and that is just by doing analysis of the kind of weaponry which the Chinese are accumulating, which is not something which can be used or they need to use against smaller neighbors, including Vietnam, despite it being a fairly formidable power. You don't need it with people you have, with countries with which it has disputes on the South China Sea. Look at the kind of missiles. You have DF-21D. Now, DF-21D is an anti-ship ballistic missile which can strike aircraft carriers. Now, which is the neighboring country which has an aircraft carrier except the United States? DF-26, ideally suited to attack Guam. CJ-10 missiles, Korea cruise missiles. DF-5B, it is a MIRV. It has what is called a multiple independently target re-entry vehicle. Now, you don't need this kind of weapons with smaller neighbors around in South China Sea. So if you do the analysis of the inventory which the Chinese are accumulating and focusing upon, and apart from that, also the naval component, the focus on submarines, the SLBMs which they are developing, the GL-10 missiles which they are developing and integrated onto their underwater platforms. These are missiles purely, and the rest of the weaponry purely targeted in defense of the accumulation forces of the United States. Apart from the United States, you don't need this for the smaller
Okay,
neighbors.
so you're saying that the neighbors...
Going by just an analysis of the force constitution, the kind of weaponry they're accumulating, I doubt we can reach to the conclusion which Mr. Chaulia did.
Oh, very quickly.
You know, they're investing so much in shipbuilding, and they're investing so much in enhancing the naval fleet.
I think we'll get
resources are being
we'll get
spent
Uday Bhaskar on that. On as far as naval fleet is concerned, I'm sure
on
he's better.
intimidating smaller
He will be
neighbors,
better placed to. But I want Mr. Sikri to. Mr. Sikri, would you agree that this threat perception as far as the neighbors are concerned, around them? One. Second thing is it an irony that Xi Jinping was talking peace when he was displaying this military might?
Strange way to talk peace. When you have frightened all your neighbors, when you have certainly not following a policy of peaceful development and harmony. So I think this is just meant to intimidate. And in a way, I think it reflects some of the inner hollowness of China today. Let's not get too impressed with this Chinese might. I recall very clearly in 1991, when the Soviet Union broke up, the Red Army was very, very strong. But it couldn't prevent the breakup of the country. I think it was rightly mentioned by one of the participants today that the real threats are internal. And the internal security forces, as a proportion of the total military and police strength, is huge. Even in their own documents and statements, they talk about Tibet and Xinjiang.
Right.
Now, these weapons are not going to be used there. Then, as has been pointed out, they're not going to be used against the smaller countries like Philippines or Vietnam, with whom they have problems, or even Japan. So this is just meant for a bit of a show to bolster the standing and the prestige of the regime and of Xi Jinping, to show the people that, look, we are strong, nobody can intimidate us, and so on and so forth.
Okay. Uday Bhaskar? Would you agree that this is about the internal situation? They are trying, this whole, some people have written and commented that this is actually the show of strength was essentially to cover up some of the problems, internal problems which the country is facing, especially in the economic field.
Well, Girish, as I was saying earlier, to me, the parade today was really a spectacular symbolism as far as President Xi Jinping is concerned, and that the symbolism was multi-layered in terms of the messages that were being sent out. I had identified the domestic constituency as a very important component because in the last 2 years since President Xi has really come into the saddle in a very effective way, he has initiated a number of domestic initiatives. For instance, the corruption, as far as the PLA generals are concerned. Within the party, let's not forget that the Boshila incident could have gone either way. I mean, the internal dynamic of the politics of China is very, very complex. And I think it was necessary for Mr. Xi Jinping to demonstrate that he's fully in charge. In a way, I think the timing of the economic turbulence, which was just preceded the parade by a few weeks, also caused a certain amount of disquiet as far as the top leadership is concerned. And the Chinese Communist Party, this is my personal assessment, they have a single objective. How can the party retain its control, avoid another Tiananmen? I mean, that is the deep symbolism as far as the Chinese state is concerned. To that extent,
so are you trying to say this show of strength was as much to internally?
Yeah, to the domestic audience,
audience?
Assuage them, to reassure them that China is a very credible power. We have this military capability, which is why they put out all the technical characteristics that Atul Aneja was referring to. And the subtext, unstated, was America or the alliance of America and Japan will not in any way, quote unquote, intimidate China. So I think to me, the messaging is, in a way, I would say, at many levels. I just want to add, Girish, that the guest list is also very interesting. If you look at the number of leaders who were there, the fact that President of Russia, Mr. Putin, was there, you had the South African president. Interestingly, from the
South
Indian
Korean.
perspective, you had Vietnam, you had Myanmar. So I think China's ability to have this kind of what you might call as an acknowledgement at the political level is also very interesting. And that is where I think the relevance for India also comes to the fore.
Okay, Mr. Stobdan, as far as India, relevance to India, which he's talking about, and also, this whole issue of whether it is a threat to neighbors or it's not a threat to neighbors.
I don't think, as far as India is concerned, that on the ground, situation is likely to change fundamentally. Because even if there are reductions in the troop level, this is going to be, I think, on the non-combative component of that. There are forces like Xinjiang Construction Corps, which is actually part of the PLA account. And there are many other internal deployments which were actually meant for internal security, were also part of the PLA control. And mind you that the PLA is also engaged in economic activities and industries and manufacturing and companies and so on and so on. We really don't know. The details are yet to come.
Exactly.
Details are yet to come, and I don't think this would apply to India-China border. This certainly it's not a message that we need to get to ourselves, that we also need to respond in a similar way.
So there's no pressure on India from this.
No. I certainly don't see it like that.
Okay. Sreeram?
Well, Indian Ocean, we need to be watchful because now Maldives has become a big problem child for us. I mean, that's where the Chinese are, mixing civilian and military tactics and trying to essentially establish themselves. And that's one area. We have warded off the challenge in Sri Lanka through creative interventions and, of course, the will of the Sri Lankan people. But Maldives always remains a question. And then what else? I mean, they have this ability to pick at small states. I think Prime Minister Modi is doing a great job of shoring up our ability in the Asia Pacific, across the Asia Pacific, with small countries like we did with the Pacific nations. But still, a lot needs to be done to be able to have, some kind of counterbalance. Because otherwise, what you have is, this, shadow, this looming shadow, which is advancing, especially across the waters, and has this extraordinary capabilities. I mean, we're talking about our defense expenditure, our layouts, our capabilities are like 1/4, 1/5 of what the Chinese have.
Absolutely.
And that is a matter of concern.
Okay, Atul, what is the message that India needs to take from this?
I'll just take off from where Bhaskar had left. I think he's read the script perfectly, because this is a question, this parade and the speeches which took place. There is a messaging which is going towards multiple quarters, international as well as domestic. Though I don't think that there is a real crisis inside China on the domestic front. Of course, there is turbulence within the military, and
Economy.
the anti-corruption campaign is targeting. So
What about the economy?
Now, the economy is what we have had is a stock market crash. There are various reasons why that has happened.
And also the
response
devaluation.
has also been very. Sorry.
And also the devaluation.
Yes, it has happened. It has happened, but there is nothing to the level that it's a critical crisis or anything. There is a readjustment process when China is moving from its export-led economy to a more sophisticated economy, and there's going to be a time frame within which it does a transition. It needs to shed off its extra or excessive manufacturing capacity to some other country, and India is probably the country which they are looking at. And I think in the Make in India campaign of Mr. Modi, they are looking at China for that. There is a symbiotic relationship which might develop on that front. But coming to your earlier question, that what is there for India in this? Now, going by what Bhaskar said, the guest list, you had either the SCO Corps present over there. This is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. You had all the Central Asian Republic heads of state. You also had Belarus over there. And then you or you had also a BRICS core. I mean, you had Jacob Zuma over there, China itself as a host, and Vladimir Putin. Putin, of course, goes in both. I think for India, after Modi's visit, we are missing a trick of engaging Eurasia. And this was an opportunity which we could have seized and shown that we are part of this new world, the new Eurasian or Silk Road world order which is emerging. And by sending General V.K. Singh, despite all his credentials as a former military chief, but he's still a minister of state.
Right.
We probably needed to have sent somebody in a higher protocol, in the sense, or at a ministerial level. Probably the External Affairs Minister could have gone. And finally, you see, India had played such a major role in defeating Japanese militarism. I mean, it was the Indians who supported the Chinese resistance through this Assam-Burma Stilwell Road. I mean, it's a heroic saga of Indians and the allied forces of the time defeating Japanese militarism and actually working with China. There was a mention of Dr. Kotnis during the parade, in the commentary which took place over there.
Okay.
But I think India forgets its own history, that we are connected much more. We celebrate the 1965 war in a big way, but defeat of fascism, in which we have played and sacrificed so much, does not count, because it happens to be China.
Okay.
And events of 62 seem
I
to
think
override
you are-
all the
you are-
historical relationship.
Atul, you have raised a lot of interest here in the studio. Everybody wants to react to it. Mr. Sikri first.
Well, I completely disagree with Atul. I think he's breathing too much of the Beijing air and looking too much into history rather than the future. I mean, this is a political decision which has been taken, and at a time when Japan is our very important partner, I don't see why we should be doing Japan bashing in China. General V.K. Singh was sent after careful consideration. It is probably appropriate level. So I don't think we need to be defensive about this and so forth.
Okay,
but
stop
I have a couple of
very
other
quickly,
points I
very
want to
quickly,
say.
we're running out of time.
Yes. No, you gave Atul a lot of time. So
No,
let me also say. One point. Let us not forget that the PLA is essentially the party's army. It is not so much a national army as the party's army, whose first job is to ensure that the CCP remains in power. And number two, I do not agree that the economic crisis in China should be underestimated. It's a very serious crisis and casts doubts on the long-term viability of the Chinese model of economic development.
Stobdan.
I think I agree that dealing with China is not simple. We can't go extreme while engaging China. Of course, engaging China is very important.
Was sending V.K. Singh the right?
I think this was a considered sort of
You agree
policy.
with it?
Yes, I think
Very
so.
quickly,
I
Sreeram.
don't think Modi or anybody higher up should have gone, because, as others have said, Japan is too important for us to neglect. And historically, Subhash Bose also fought for India on the side of the Japanese. We can never forget that.
These kind of arguments can be on either side. Very quickly, last words to you, Uday.
I think the decision to send the Minister of State for External Affairs was a very prudent decision, point one. The message for India from this parade, if I could add, Girish, is look at the percentage of indigenous platforms on that parade. If there's one message for India, if you want to be taken more seriously, if your strategic autonomy that you subscribe to has to be more credible, enhance your ability to design and manufacture critical military inventory.
Okay. I think on that note, we need to end. It has been an interesting debate. There are differences of opinion, but that's the way it is whenever we discuss China. So thanks to all my guests. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue in the big picture, same time on Monday. Meanwhile, have a great weekend.